So you've probably heard about the Atari 2600 Plus that was announced about a week ago. It's a new console that's compatible with the original 2600 and 7800. Really cool that Atari's coming out with a new way to play your original cartridges. But is it really Atari that's behind this, as in the original company from the 80s? Or is there more to the story? Let's take a look. Alright, well, the semester just started. What's going on, guys? It's Podrez coming at you with another video. So we're going to be talking about the Atari 2600 Plus, and we're going to be talking about who's actually making this. Anyway, we're really close to 10,000 subscribers. Just hit that subscribe button right there and you'll help me get there. If everyone watching this video hits that subscribe button, I will literally hit it tomorrow. And don't forget, we got a Discord server. It's doing really well right now. Just go to discord.podrez.net or click on the link in the description. Anyway, stick around. I think this will be an interesting video. About a week ago, Atari announced the 2600 Plus. In the past few years, Atari's been releasing some questionable products. For example, their Atari box, which was confusingly renamed the VCS, was an overly expensive emulation box that didn't have any exclusive games. This unit really didn't offer anything that a basic PC or Raspberry Pi didn't already do. Most people who bought this only did so because of the name. It took them a really long time to send out pre-orders too. Not a super great product in general. For their 50th anniversary, Atari would sell a limited edition box set of 10 of their classic titles for $1,000. They look cool, but who would pay $1,000 for something like this? To be fair though, Atari also sold some decent products. They do have some reproduction games available on their site, and even some new titles like Mr. Run and Jump. So what about the 2600 Plus? For those who don't know, it's a brand new console that's coming out in November, and it will support both 2600 and 7800 cartridges. It comes with a cartridge that contains 10 classic Atari titles. So yeah, it's a console that supports your original cartridges in HDMI output. So how do I feel about it? If this console were a recreation of the original hardware or FPGA hardware, this would be a slam dunk. This would by far be the best way to play 2600 and 7800 games outside of buying a Mister. But because it's emulation, it's not quite as special, but still a decent product. You might have the urge to compare this to the Retron 77, which is another 2600 clone that runs on emulation. This is a cheaper alternative, but this unit has very limited compatibility with games, and it doesn't have 7800 support. Plus, it's not an official Atari product. Whether you choose the Retron 77 or 2600 Plus, these are great ways to play classic Atari titles because the original consoles only supported RF output, which doesn't look great on modern TVs. Going back to compatibility for a second, they're very upfront with what's supported and what's not, which I respect. A lot of games have not been tested though, but I imagine 99% of these will work. The only games that are confirmed to not work are Real Sports Boxing, Super Cobra, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think releasing a pack-in game that contains 10 titles is a great idea, and I hope Atari releases more compilation games like this on their website. Maybe have a sports-themed one or a puzzle-themed one. They already sell other 2600 cartridges on their website, so this new console makes a great companion. A lot of people have complained about the price of this thing, $130, but I think that's pretty reasonable considering it supports 2 consoles and it's an official product. So here's my final thoughts. I think this is a product people will actually want, unlike the Atari box. It's a nice way to play your classic games on a modern TV, but because it's emulation and not real hardware, it's not quite as special, and a very similar product has already been made. But I do think it's cool that Atari is re-releasing this console after so many years. But is this actually Atari, or just a different company that uses the Atari name? In other words, is this the same group of people that were around in the late 70s and early 80s? Well, Atari has actually had a lot of buyouts and name changes, and it's a little confusing, but I'll talk about each of them. First, we'll talk about Atari Inc. This is the original Atari that was founded by Nolan Bushnell, who would be the CEO from 1976 to 1978. In that time, we would see numerous early arcade games, home Pong consoles, and the release of the Atari 2600. The workplace environment was very relaxed under Bushnell. He would let his employees wear t-shirts and jeans, and there were company-sponsored events that had hot tubs, alcohol, and marijuana. In order to speed up the development process of the upcoming Atari 2600, Bushnell sold the company to Warner Communications. But the new company disagreed with some of Bushnell's strategies, and they put Ray Kassar in charge, which meant Bushnell was no longer with the company. Despite that though, Nolan Bushnell is generally regarded positively, and if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be talking about this today. Kassar wasn't as well liked as CEO. A lot of employees were unhappy with the way they were treated, and some developers would voice their issues to Ray Kassar but would be turned away. Many employees left the company because of Kassar, including programmer David Crane, who formed Activision. We would see some success under Kassar, like the release of Space Invaders, which would put Atari on the map. But under Kassar's administration, we would see a lot of failures too. Both Pac-Man and E.T. were released under Kassar, and they were both rushed to meet a deadline, and as a result, neither game was well received. Some of the choices that were made under Kassar's management team led to consumers not trusting Atari or their games, which had some part in the cause of the video game crash of 1983. Atari Inc. would end up getting into some major financial issues, and by 1984, the company was split into two. One of them was Atari Corporation, which retained the console and computer divisions, and the other was Atari Games, which kept most of the employees from Atari Inc. but only focused on arcade titles. So the original company that Bushnell founded was officially dead. Atari Corporation would be led by Jack Tramiel, and he would hire a brand new team, so the original developers that made the 2600 great were no longer in the picture. Originally, Tramiel put the 2600 on the back burner in favor of the computer scene, but later on he would resurrect older projects that were scrapped, like the 7800 and a few unreleased 2600 games. Similar to Ray Kassar, Jack Tramiel was not well liked, and it impacted Atari negatively. A lot of companies didn't want to do business with Atari because they didn't want to deal with Tramiel. Under Jack Tramiel, we would receive the 7800, the Lynx, and the Jaguar. The company fell on harder times because of the Jaguar being a commercial failure. Tramiel wanted out of the company and ended up selling Atari Corporation to JTS Corporation, who would then sell it to Hasbro Interactive in 1998. At this point, most of Atari Corporation's employees were either fired or voluntarily resigned. So to recap, Atari Inc.'s original employees from the late 70s and early 80s had nothing to do with Atari Corporation. Tramiel hired a completely new team of employees, and now after the acquisition, those employees were gone as well. So we can see that Atari isn't really Atari at this point. You have the name and all the assets, but that's it. Going back to Atari Games, which was the other company that was formed after the dissolving of Atari Inc., they would make some well-known arcade titles, including Marble Madness, Paperboy, Gauntlet, and others. They didn't have access to any of Atari's assets, those were given to Atari Corporation, so there would be no Breakout, Asteroids, or Missile Command from these guys. Like I mentioned before, most of the employees that left Atari Inc. flocked over to Atari Games, so this is the closest resemblance of the original company that we would get. About a year into their operation, they expressed interest in developing games for consoles, but they weren't allowed to use the Atari Games branding on console games because it would have been indistinguishable from Atari Corporation, so they published them under the name Tengen. They would publish games on numerous consoles, most notably the NES, where they made unlicensed games behind Nintendo's back. So most people claim that Tengen is just Atari, and this is basically true if you consider most of the employees from the original company moved over to Tengen. But if we're being technical, they're Atari Games, not Atari Inc. So what happened to the company? In 1996, Atari Games was sold to WMS Industries, who also owned Midway. But then the company was renamed to Midway Games, and the name Atari Games would be officially dropped. However, in 2009, Midway would file for bankruptcy, and most of Atari Games' assets would be sold to Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment. So basically, the assets are still around, but the company itself isn't. So we have one company that was bought out and lost most of their employees, and another one that was bought out, went bankrupt, and their assets were sold. So here's the big question: with the original company dead, and these two other companies seemingly dead, where did this new Atari come from? Well, it all stems from Hasbro's acquisition of Atari Corporation. In 2000, Hasbro was going through some financial troubles, and they sold their company to Infogrames. Infogrames really valued the Atari name, and they decided to go all in on it. They renamed their French headquarters to Atari SA, and they would change one of their acquired companies to Atari Inc., not to be confused with the original company from the early 80s. The new Atari Inc. would be the American subsidiary of Atari SA. And finally, Hasbro would be renamed to Atari Interactive, who owns the Atari branding that is licensed out to Atari SA. So that's probably all really confusing, but all you need to know is that Infogrames took the Atari assets from Hasbro and decided to build their company around it. I'm not a business expert, but it's interesting that they decided to do this because Atari is really not a recognizable name anymore. That would be like if I were a big store chain and I acquired Kmart and decided to rebrand all my stores and headquarters to Kmart. I guess you could say I'd be part of the Kmart cult. So what's my point? With all these acquisitions, employees leaving, and companies being dissolved, Atari is just a name now. None of the same talent that was there before is present now. So why does this matter? Some people buying the Atari box or the new 2600 Plus might believe they're buying from the same company that existed in the early 80s, but it's really not. It may say Atari on the cover, but it's not really them. Even though it's just a name, is the 2600 Plus worth it? At this point, the original Atari Inc. from the 80s no longer exists. Despite that though, the 2600 Plus still seems promising. It's a shame it's not real hardware or FPGA, but even as emulation, it's still worth considering. It's one of the few viable ways of playing these old games on modern TVs, and it even has 7800 support, which is uncommon. If you're looking for a way to play your Atari cartridges, this might be the way to go. Hey, I just wanted to thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it this far, hit that like button. If you enjoy this type of content, hit the subscribe button for more content. Both of these things really help the channel grow. If you have anything to share, feel free to leave a comment. I read every single comment on this channel, and I'm pretty good at replying back. Anyway, have a good one.